Well, hello everyone, and welcome to One Civil Law for a very brief video. For those of you who had not seen, the U.S. Supreme Court turned down Karen Reed's petition for a writ of certiorari. This is in relation to her habeas case that she filed. As you may recall, there was an argument that the jury in fact came to a verdict with respect to counts 1 and 3, and therefore that verdict, which was not guilty, should have been honored and entered. And as I'm sure you're well aware, she lost that argument at every step of the argument. She lost it at the Supreme Court of the state, the Supreme Judicial Court. She lost it, and then she tried a collateral attack at federal law, and she lost, of course, in the District Court, the Court of Appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court, which was not surprising. This was exactly what I predicted happened, and even Justice Jackson wouldn't give a vote on the issue as it related to any sort of emergency relief, which was a pretty decent sign that there was never going to be things there by the Supreme Court or any federal court, really. The case law just simply wasn't there on this issue. There may not be many cases on this point, on this fact pattern, but the cases that do exist seem to just kind of go the other way for reasons we've discussed. One of the biggest problems is that as a matter of federal law, it's not even clear that you need to have complete verdicts. So there was no requirement as a matter of federal law that if the judge had asked, what the verdicts were, and the jury had said not guilty as to 1 and 3, but we're not sure as to 2. There's not even clear federal law that the judge would be not allowed to say, well, that's just not good enough, and I'm not going to accept any verdicts, particularly if that was the determination by the judge in advance, if that was made clear as the rule in advance. If the judge said, at the start, unless it's complete, I'm not going to accept it, and then asked for some reason if they had any partial verdicts, and they said, well, we do on 1 and 3, but not 2. It's not clear that as a matter of federal law, they would need to accept the partial verdicts. And there's case law that certainly suggests that, including from the U.S. Supreme Court, which we've talked about as well. There was a case that we talked about where the jury, in fact, did come back arguably in the middle deliberations and said, we're not guilty as to the homicide counts. And then at a later time said, well, we're not clear. So it's not even clear that the court is required to accept partial verdicts as a matter of federal law. So that was part of the big problem, because not only does you have to conclude the jury in fact came to a verdict on count 1 and 3, you'd also have to conclude that given that the judge therefore would have to enter those verdicts. And there's just no federal case law that seems to stand for that proposition. And what case law there is seems to suggest the opposite. It's not a wholly invalid argument, of course, if you actually had that scenario where a judge asked for partial verdicts and refused to enter them, someone would absolutely raise that challenge. There's no case law that explicitly says that they can refuse it. There's just what the case law does exist seems to suggest that they can, but it wouldn't be an invalid argument. But without that piece, without the piece of the puzzle that they have to accept partial verdicts, without that as a matter of federal law, then there's really no point in trying to decide whether the jury came to a complete verdict as to count 1 and 3, because even if they did, it wouldn't necessarily be legally sufficient. And that was the big problem on the case law. So yeah, not particularly surprising that she lost. And I know that's really disappointing to a lot of you, but the federal law is what it is. And, it's sometimes is not always what you'd expect it to be. And that's just the scenarios of all the things that are relevant to that. And of course, it will also be very interesting to see what the defense team asks for when they finally do get to giving instructions to the jury. Because I would imagine that the judge is going to ask the defense whether or not they want partial verdicts or not. And it'll be very interesting to see what the defense says. They were really insistent, of course, in their pleadings that there should have been partial verdicts, but they were only insistent on that because they know the answer. right? It's like, of course we wanted partial verdicts, but they know the answer. This time they won't know the answer. They won't know what this jury's going to do. So it'll be interesting to see if they want partial verdicts or not. My bet is that they're not going to ask for it. I don't think they're going to do it, but we'll only see. We'll see as far as it goes. Yeah. So that's basically all I have to say about that. Not a really long stream. And we'll see if there was any comments in chat. There really aren't today. As to whether or not she's getting a guilty verdict, it's obviously way premature for that. I would tend to agree that the prosecution so far has led in a very effective case, but they have not been burdened with their most problematic witnesses yet, which is the police and the medical examiners and the logs and the solo cups and things like that. So far, the prosecution is, at least to my mind, laying out a very persuasive case, but they haven't been burned with their biggest problems yet. So there's a long way to go. So we'll see how it's going. So that's where we're sitting. Bev allowing Hank to continue to abuse the person today was unacceptable. I agree. I found it incredibly distasteful, as I reacted to earlier. The voir dire / deposition / hearing that happened today was very, very difficult to watch, upsetting, and in defiance of any sort of legal principle that I can identify. My understanding is that pretty much everyone who reacted to it kind of felt the same way, because it was just so incredibly over the top and batshit nuts. But yeah, so that's sort of where that's sitting. Anything else that I can sort of summarize before we sort of cut the stream, because it's just a really quick update. But if there's anything else, I'll be happy to talk about it. But everyone's probably pretty tired from today. I know I am. I'm looking forward to some sleep pretty soon. Thank you for saying you heart me. That's very nice. I appreciate that. I take the compliment with grace. It will also be interesting to see what Aunt Bev, of course, does with respect to ARCA, although the tea leaf seems to suggest that she's going to allow the ARCA to submit their report by the 7th and just, begrudgingly yell at the defense for being sloppy and stuff. So just more yelling without any sort of consequence, because that seems like what was going on today. Okay. All right. Yeah, I can't wait to see Jen get crossed. Yeah, that should be fun and exciting. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I think Runkle's streaming, so I'll go ahead and dump you over there. Yeah, I'll dump you over to Runkle the Bailey, my friend and yours, and I'll go hang out with you in chat over there. I've been Uncivil Law. Till later, my friends. I hope all's well. Cheers for now, my friends, and goodbye.